Xi Jinping says China must prepare for war. Meanwhile, China is putting Hong Kong under tighter control. And the US and China are in a new Cold War. But who started it? This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has told troops to prepare for war. So, I guess Xi Jinping is no longer going with the stronger international cooperation line anymore. Now, to be fair, this is not the first time Xi has told troops to prepare for war. He does it every so often. This time, Xi Jinping didn't say specifically who the troops should prepare for war against, but he did say the purpose is to resolutely safeguard national sovereignty. I guess that could mean one of several countries, and that includes India. The border dispute between India and China seems to be heating up. China and India share one of the world's longest unmarked borders, called the Line of Actual Control, which is less like a formal border and more like a line of actual control. Indian and Chinese troops have clashed here several times already in just May. Both sides have tried to downplay the clashes, but satellite images may be telling a different story.
Both sides appear to be bolstering their presence. An Australian security analyst posted these satellite pictures on Twitter last week. They appear to show both sides building more tents and roads within 5 kilometres of the line of actual control which separates the two armies.
India and China once fought a serious war over their border. That was back in 1962. There was also a series of military clashes along the border in 1967. So, could it happen again? Well, never fear, because President Donald Trump says he's ready to mediate the conflict. I assume world peace is now just around the corner. But of course, not in Hong Kong. Stay tuned after the break for how the Chinese regime is putting Hong Kong under tighter and tighter control. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Hong Kong, the Pearl of the Orient, a pearl that's currently being swallowed up by the gaping maw of an ancient, once slumbering evil, the Chinese Communist Cthulhu. That's not me saying that. It's the US State Department. Okay, they said it in slightly less colorful language. According to the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, each year, the State Department has to tell Congress whether Hong Kong is sufficiently autonomous from China to justify its unique treatment. This week, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Congress that no reasonable person can assert today that Hong Kong maintains a high degree of autonomy from China, given facts on the ground. That is huge. Not this huge, but it's significant. Pompeo made that statement on May 27th, a week after Beijing suddenly announced that the National People's Congress, or NPC, would look at passing a national security law for Hong Kong. The law would ban secession, subversion of state power, foreign interference, and terrorism. Now, all that would not be quite as scary if we were talking about a liberal democracy. But we're talking about the Chinese Communist Cthulhu. That means what this law would really ban is any protest against the Chinese regime and, by extension, the Hong Kong government, like all the protests in Hong Kong over the past year. The law would come directly from Beijing and would be applied to Hong Kong without a vote from the Hong Kong Legislative Council. That essentially ends the autonomy Hong Kong was promised under one country, two systems. On Thursday, the NPC officially voted to implement this national security law. 2,878 for and 1 against? Don't get too excited about the fact that one person voted against it. The same thing happened during the vote to end term limits for Chinese leader Xi Jinping. It's how the Chinese Communist Party likes to pretend these are democratic votes. I mean, having everyone vote for something unanimously would look suspicious. So, let's just have one person vote against it. Perfect. Looks totally legit now. Now, it's important to clarify that the NPC vote does not mean the national security law has been passed. They have to write it first. Yeah, that's how it works. First, the NPC votes for the law, and then the NPC Standing Committee figures out what's in it. Look, don't ask questions. But we do have at least an idea of what will be in the law from the text of the NPC's decision to establish it. For example, Section 2 says that the state will employ necessary measures to counter, lawfully prevent, stop and punish foreign and overseas forces' use of Hong Kong to carry out separatist, subversive, infiltrative, or destructive activities. So, I'm not sure how welcome China Uncensored would be in Hong Kong under this new national security law. But the most alarming part of the upcoming law is in Section 4. The organs of the Central People's Government relevant for the protection of national security are to set up institutions in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region as required to lawfully perform duties related to the preservation of national security. Let me translate. That means that Chinese secret police, either the Ministry of State Security or something like that, would be allowed to legally operate in Hong Kong. That's never happened before. And it's one more sign that one country, two systems is over. You know, millions of Hong Kongers marched in the streets last year because they were afraid of being dragged away to the secret police in China, which then really happened. But good news, Hong Kongers, now you won't have to worry about that anymore because Beijing is bringing the secret police to you. Now, despite the risks, the people of Hong Kong haven't taken this lying down. Thousands marched through the streets over the weekend to protest the national security law. These signs say, "Heaven will destroy the Chinese Communist Party." Yeah, holding or even printing those signs will probably be illegal under the national security law. Meanwhile, those protesters were met with familiar tear gas and pepper guns from the Hong Kong police. But protests broke out again on Wednesday when the Hong Kong Legislative Council was debating a national anthem law. Oh yeah, I haven't even talked about the national anthem law yet. It would mean that Hong Kongers could be jailed for up to 3 years for parodying or insulting the Chinese national anthem. And Hong Kong's pro-Beijing lawmakers have been trying to push that law through this week. But it hasn't been easy. This is pro-democracy lawmaker Eddie Chu being physically dragged out of LegCo for opposing it. And Hong Kong police were stationed across the city on Wednesday to stop protesters from marching against it. When there were protests anyway, police responded with pepper guns and more than 300 arrests. So where do things stand now? It's not clear how long it will take the NPC Standing Committee to write the national security law for Hong Kong. It could take as little as a month, or it could be several months. Meanwhile, the backlash against the Chinese Communist Party for the law has been more substantial than they were probably expecting. The US, UK, Australia, and Canada issued a joint statement condemning the move. Taiwan says it will welcome Hong Kongers who flee the security law crackdown. But the most significant response is the US declaring that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous from China. That could be a huge blow to Hong Kong's status as an international financial hub. It opens the door for the US Congress or President Trump to issue sanctions against Chinese and Hong Kong officials, or to revoke America's special trade status with Hong Kong. Now, while those actions would definitely harm the Chinese Communist Party, some of them could also harm Hong Kong. But many Hong Kongers are welcoming the US government's actions anyway. That's because one of the growing themes of the Hong Kong protests has been the idea of lam chao. In English, this idea has been translated as, if we burn, you burn with us. Basically, the Hong Kong protesters know they can't stop their city from being swallowed by the Chinese Communist Cthulhu. But they can try their hardest to make Cthulhu choke on it. So Hong Kong might suffer some damage, but they say it would be worth it to bring down the Chinese Communist Party. One thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting few months ahead. And coming up after the break, the US and China are in a new Cold War. But who started it? Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Last week, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned the US against taking the US and China to the brink of a new Cold War. Yes, as the US government increasingly calls out the Chinese Communist Party, there is growing concern among Western media over the idea of a new Cold War. For example, this article saying that a new Cold War could devastate the global economy. Why is it happening now? Well, it's because of the coronavirus pandemic. No, wait, it's because of Hong Kong. Look, the important thing is a new Cold War has begun. It's already underway. And who started this whole Cold War anyway? Did Trump ignite a Cold War with China to win the election? Or did the new Cold War start in Beijing? Look, the answer to that is clear. Everybody knows that whoever smelt it, dealt it. Unless whoever denied it, supplied it. Obviously. Now, the idea that the US and China are heading to or are already in some kind of Cold War isn't new. In fact, we did an episode on Cold War II almost 2 years ago when the CIA was talking about it. When the CIA was talking about it publicly. We don't have an inside man at the CIA. Anyway, there are a lot of opinions on this issue. But the most important thing to know is that the US doesn't need a new Cold War, because a Cold War with China would be a mistake. Look, no one wants a new Cold War, except maybe this guy. But many, although not all of these articles warning about a new Cold War, make the same fundamental mistakes. The first mistake is that they don't take what the Chinese Communist Party has said and done seriously. Take this Washington Post opinion piece. It acknowledges that the common wisdom that the US and China and their intertwined economies would inevitably get along is also fading. I wonder why. The piece mentions how China's entry into the World Trade Organization nearly 2 decades ago was once seen as a towering achievement of globalization. Then it suggests that the Trump administration considers that bad because Trump doesn't like the WTO. But the article fails to mention all of the ways that the Chinese Communist Party has constantly cheated and broken their promises since they joined the WTO, through things like unfair trade practices, keeping out foreign competition, and forced technology transfer. This is the U.S. Trade Representative's 192-page report to Congress on China's WTO compliance. It concludes that a consistent pattern existed where the United States raised a particular concern, China specifically promised to address that concern, and China's promise was not fulfilled. But you know what? That's nothing to worry about. Because this Wall Street Journal opinion piece says that the US government is overstating China's ambitions and capabilities. Because Beijing isn't seeking to overturn the global order. Obviously. I mean, it's not like China has some kind of vision for the new world order. It's not like they have plans to win control of the global order just because, according to a leaked internal Chinese Communist Party directive, they see themselves as being in the midst of an intense ideological struggle for survival. Or because Chinese leader Xi Jinping made a speech about how the party must build a socialism that is superior to capitalism and lay the foundation for a future where we will win the initiative and have the dominant position. Does that even really mean anything? Xi Jinping is probably overstating China's ambitions. He's just full of hot air. The basic message from these Cold War articles is that a Cold War sounds scary. Nobody wants that, so we don't really need to confront China. Okay, maybe confront it a little bit, but not a lot, because our economies are intertwined, because we need to cooperate on the coronavirus, because we shouldn't upset the balance of the international order. Sure, the Chinese Communist Party is doing a bit of ethnic cleansing here and there, and militarizing islands in the South China Sea. But if we just continue with the same normal diplomacy we've used for decades, we can get them to stop. I mean, it hasn't worked so far, but you know what they say. 583rd time's the charm. You know who agrees with this perspective? The Chinese Communist Party. They don't like being challenged, and they know that the term Cold War brings up bad connotations. So they keep accusing the US and other countries that criticize them of having a Cold War mentality when it comes to trade, or the Hong Kong protests, or just, in general. I wonder if they ever get tired of repeating themselves. Anyway, the point is that when Chinese government officials criticize what they explicitly call a Cold War mentality in the US, they aren't calling for an end to ideological competition or great power rivalry, but rather to US attempts to stymie Beijing's plans. That's because, as I said earlier, the Communist Party does see itself in an ideological struggle for survival. That's clear from their own internal documents. Which brings me to the second mistake that many Western media are making in their Cold War articles. They're not taking the Trump administration's response to the Chinese Communist Party seriously. Look, regardless of how you feel about Trump as a person, it's important to look at what his administration is actually saying and doing about the Chinese Communist Party. Some media are just playing it off as something that's happening only because Trump needs a campaign issue more promising than the plummeting economy, or casting it as an attempt to prevent China's rise. So how is the US actually responding to the Chinese Communist Party? The Trump administration recently released a 16-page document explaining the United States' strategic approach to the People's Republic of China. It's worth a read. Because when it comes to changing America's China policy, the Trump administration just let it rip. For one, the document specifically calls out the Chinese Communist Party, which they will hate. It also lays out how the party's actions threaten America's economy, security, and values. And it clearly says that this is an ideological struggle for the party. Given the strategic choices China's leadership is making, the United States now acknowledges and accepts the relationship with the PRC as the CCP has always framed it internally, one of great power competition. The administration states that the US is not trying to prevent China's rise, and that China's future can only be determined by the Chinese people themselves. But they're also clear that they're not going to accept how the Communist Party wants to frame things, calling out the CCP's attempts at false equivalency as well as Beijing's propaganda and false narratives that distort the truth and attempt to demean American values and ideals. The US will also respond to what the CCP actually does, not what it promises to do. And when quiet diplomacy proves futile, the United States will increase public pressure on the Chinese government and take action to protect United States interests by leveraging proportional costs when necessary. Wow. Like I said, the whole document is worth reading. So whether or not you want to call it a new Cold War, it's clear that the US is not backing down from an overall strategic approach to confronting the Chinese Communist Party. The question is, how will the party respond to the US government's tougher stance? After all, for years, they've managed to get their silent but deadly diplomacy past the rest of the world. And now, the US is lit to match. And that's it for this week's China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber. But you know, there's a common Chinese saying, "La schmaz." What's that, Shelley? Oh, okay. I'm being told no Chinese people ever say that. At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views on an episode, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. Ride in luxury to your destination in only double the amount of time it would take you to fly there. Dreams come true. And China is the little engine that could. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
It's kind of ironic that I'm the minority in a show about China. People in the comments, they'll be like, "You're a traitor." I'm being a patriot. This is my way of showing that I love the country that I came from.
Matt, Shelley, and I went to the Philippines to disputed waters, the Scarborough Shoal.
China and the Philippines claim the Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese military is asserting its claims in the South China Sea, so there's a dispute.
We had to take a rickety little Filipino fishing boat surrounded by threatening Chinese Coast Guard vessels.
Chris planted the China Uncensored flag, and then we got away with it. Chris, Shelley, our cameraman, and I went to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, hoping to interview the leader of China, Xi Jinping.
Oh, we are being helped. Going to...
What is it? China Uncensored?
China Uncensored, yeah. I don't suppose there's a chance I could use it.
Down the staircase.
The lead security guard followed us out and said we were banned for life from the Waldorf Astoria. Chris Chappell here right outside of Mongkok. Our camera guy is in there right now. He's seen people getting beat by police. Police are trying to tear down the tents. Things are wild now.
People would say things to us like, "My professor plays China Uncensored for our class." To see people really believe in what we were talking about was life-changing for all of us.
One word you would use to describe Chris Chappell.
Committed.
Hilarious.
Engaging. Intriguing.
Have you heard of China Uncensored? Great comedy show. Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the US.
The way that the US is treating China now, it will start to affect people's lives, and they'll need somewhere to go to learn about that.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国解密. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show available on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide. Have you heard of China Uncensored?
I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.